No, we're up to the Mishnah. Okay, Achav Zayin Amar Aleph. There we go. Good. Okay, we did the Mishnah. We did Chavav Beis yesterday. We got up to the top. Okay, here we go. Daf Chazayin Amar Aleph in Sukkah. The Mishnah. Geshmak is a Geshmak Sukkah today. We've been doing, these are pretty Geshmak. Yeah, the second pair. It's been so far so good.
Less math.
Less math. Mitzvah. We spoke about Mitzvah, Mitzvah, Choyle, Shear, how much you got to eat, how much because today we're going to talk about actually eating in a sukkah, when you're obligated to eat in the sukkah. How many meals you have to have. And then, some other interesting halachas we got on the base. Here we go. Okay, so I look at Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Oimer. Arba esrei seudas chayiv adam lachal b'sukkah. Achaz b'yoyim v'achaz b'layla. Rabbi Eliezer says you got to have 14 sudas in the sukkah. 14 sukkahs. 14 sudas in the sukkah. One by day, one by night. 1 second. Isn't there always a Shabbos? So what happened to Shalosh Shudas?
Joined in with the evening meal.
What happened? There should be 15 sudas you have to eat. Good question, huh? It's a good one. What happened to the the Lamda answer would be that he's talking midin sukkah, not midin Shabbos. He's saying that sukkahs is machayev you to eat 15 sudas, 14 sudas. Sukkahs. Yeah, Shabbos you have to have that. Could be for some other reason. Yeah. Well, so that would be the Malach would be your night suda, right? But here's an additional suda on Shabbos that you need to have. But that's the Lamda Sheteretz. Is that we hear he's talking about midin sukkah. Midin sukkah you have to have 14 suudas. Could be the other reasons why you'd have to be. You had a bris meal, you have a pigeon up end. Lots of reasons why you might have a chiv, you have a suda, and you got to be in the sukkah. Okay, so Arba says suda is chayav and lachol b'sukkah. No such thing. There's no set amount. If you're hungry, you're eating. You got to eat in the sukkah. You're not hungry, you don't want to eat, so don't eat in the sukkah. Chutz, except except for the first night of sukkahs. First night of sukkahs, you must eat in the sukkah. One machlekes. Second of all, v'oid amar Rabbi Eliezer. What happens if he didn't eat the first night of sukkahs in the sukkah? And it could be according to right now. It could be if you missed a meal. It says so you make it up on a different night. Here he's saying make it up on on Shmini Atzeres. Leil Shmini Atzeres. Make it up. Okay.
It's not even sukkahs.
It's not even sukkahs. Tomorrow last question. Excellent. No, there's no tashlumin, and there's a pasuk whenever we have this idea that you can't. There's no makeups. So the Mishnah or you're messed up and there's no way to fix it. So the Gemara Mishnah brings this pasuk. It's something which is crooked that can't be fixed. And something which is missing. Something which is lacking that can't be recounted for. That is also an example. The Gemara gives a case of a mamzer. That's really the pasuk. Right? A mamzer is a mu'uvos lo yuchaliskain. Something that's messed up. There's no way to fix it. Right? There's no way to fix that. So he's saying if you miss it, the Gemara talks about carbon. If you miss the carbon, it's done. There's no way to make to fix it. Some carbon should could, maybe that's what he's saying. You could make it up. Okay, that's the Mishnah. 2 halachas in the Mishnah. We're arguing that. So let's discuss first this halacha of Rabbi Eliezer that you need to have 14 sudas in the sukkah. Says the Gemara, my time with Rabbi Eliezer. What's tried in Rabbi Eliezer? So he says, Teishu kain taduru. We've had this a few times already. Teishu, you must dwell in the sukkah. Kain taduru, the way you live in your home. Madira, just like at home, achaz b'yem v'achaz b'alayla, you have one meal by day and one meal at night. Af sukkah, achaz b'yem v'achaz b'alayla. So too, and on sukkah you need to have one meal by day and one meal by night in the sukkah. Teishu kain taduru. Nice. V'rabanan. So what do they do with that? That's a nice drasha. They say kedira. Just like you live in your house. Madira ibayachil ibaylayachil. Just like at home, if you want to eat, you eat. If you don't want to eat, you don't eat. You don't have to. So av sukkah. So the sukkah is the same halacha. Ibayachil if you want to eat. Ibaylayachil if you want, then don't eat. So that's why they hold. There's no kviyas. There's no obligation to have 14 meals. Just like you do at home, you don't always have You don't have to have a meal every day. If you want to skip it, you can skip it. Therefore, that same halacha would tell you the other way. You don't have to have. There's no set amount on during sukkahs. Before we see where they get the obligation for the first night, just take a look. Tasis is like 1 second. That line is throwing Tasis off. If you want, you eat. If you want, you don't eat. What are you talking about? There's a chiyuv to eat on the sukkah on you have to have a suuda. There's obligations. Yom Tov, there's a chiyuv to eat. We assume there's an obligation to eat to have a suuda. Sukkah's Yom Tov. With you a suuda too with bread. Right? Taisa says though from this Gemara's mashma that there is no obligation to have a suuda on Yom Tov. What's the nafkamina if you have an obligation or not? Nafkamina is do you have to repeat Yal V'Yavai in benching if you forget it? The rule is anything which you're obligated, when you're obligated to have a suuda, then if you forget Yal V'Yavai, you have to repeat. So Shabbos, let's say, you have a chiv to have a suuda. So if you forget Ritzei, you have to repeat. Benching. What about Yom Tov? Tezes brings Yal V'Yavai, Rosh Chodesh is the opposite. Rosh Chodesh, there is no obligation to have a suuda. So Nashen Azach, no chiv to have a suuda. The male, if you forget Yal V'Yavai in your suuda, you don't repeat the Berach Samazin. What about Yom Tov? Taisus brings a raya from this Gemara. Sounds like that there's no obligation to have a suuda on Yom Tov, and therefore Taisus says that you would not have to repeat Yal V'Yavai if you forgot it in benching. That's not the halacha. We don't pass like that. But that's how Taisus over here. But then he has a few Gemaras he's got to tray out of because it sounds like there would be an obligation. Okay. Now let's go back to the drasha. Okay, so now we got to go back. What about the first night? I feel Lily Yom Tov Rishon Nami. If you tell me if I want to eat, I could eat. Not. So why is the first night any different? It's a famous. This happens to me. I try not to say things are famous because it's like if you don't know this, but this one happens to me. I think it's one of this Gzeir Shava. Amar Rav Yechanan Mishum Ben Yitzadek. Nemar kan chamisha aser. It says here when talking about Sukkot, chamisha aser, the 15th. The Nemar chamisha aser b'chag hamatzos, and it says chamisha aser 15 by the chag hamatzos. Right, that's known as 2-2, tezvav tezvav. The Gzeir Shava 2-2, tezvav tezvav. Ma lahalan laila harisha chayva. Just like there's an obligation to eat matzah the first night of Pesach, mikan ve'elach roshus, and after that it's optional. If you want to eat bread, you'd have to have matzah, but you don't have to have it. Afkan laila harisha chayva, the first night of Yom Tov of Sukkot is an obligation. Mikan ve'elach roshus, but from then on it's only optional. Well, how do you know that? How do you know that the first night of Pesach is a obligation? And how do you know that the first night of Pesach is an obligation to eat matzah? Amakra be'erev teichlu matzahs. Hakasav kavoi chayva. The Torah sets it as an obligation. So we know that there's an obligation to eat matzah the first night of Pesach. And if you have an obligation to eat matzah the first night of Pesach, the Gzeir Shava Tezvav 2 tells you have an obligation to eat the first night of Sukkot as well. Therefore, there's a chiyuv to eat the first night, but the rest of Yom Tov do not have a chiyuv. Now, there is a machlokes how to understand that the Gzeir Shava, meaning how much do you have to eat the first night? So matzah, you have to eat a kazayis of matzah. So l'chayra, you would say, all right, so I guess I have to eat on Sukkot a kazayis of matzah as well, a kazayis of bread as well. The shear would be a kazayis. We find Mishen that say that it's a kibetza. So why would that be? Another machlokes would be, what happens if it's raining the first night? Do you have to eat in the sukkah or not? Right? So we wait the first night to be able to eat in the sukkah if we can. And even if it's raining, we go in there and we make a bracha. We don't make a relation, but we make kiddush and hamaitzi in the sukkah. Others hold you don't have to do that. So what's the machlokes? So I forgot who says it, but it's a we'll say it, the Velt. The Velt said that there's a machlokes in the Gzeir Shava of Tezvav. Is it a new chiyuv that I'm learning, a new chiyuv achila, or is it a gilui in the mitzvah of Teshu Kain to do? Meaning, is it just telling me that the chiyuv you have all of Sukkot, the first night's an obligation, but the characteristics of the halacha follow health sukkah. Therefore, if it's raining, you don't have a chiyuv of sukkah. And the shear you'd have to eat would be a kabeya, because that's the shear you have to have for a sukkah, right? Or is it it's a new mitzvah? There's a new obligation because of the Tasvach as well that I have to eat it, because I have to eat on the first night the same way I have to eat on Pesach, and therefore the shear would only be a kazais, and you'd have to do it even if it's raining. That's the way you could explain the machlekes rishonim when it comes to that. And so Mashayel had to understand this gezer shav tesvav. Is it a new chiyuv, or is it just a gila? Is it showing you how to fulfill that the obligation you have a holy of sukkahs, the mitzvah you have of sukkahs is obligatory the first night. Two ways to look at it. Okay, let's go weiter. Blazer says this halacha of tashlum. Okay. I don't get it. If you're telling me that if I miss the first night, then I have to make it up the last night. What about the rest of the nights of Yantif? You have or days. I have an obligation to eat 14 sudas, so I should have to make up all of them. Rabbi Lezer started in the Mishnah saying that there are 14 meals you have to eat. Then he says that if you miss the first night, you make it up on the last night. If I missed any of these sudas, I should have to make it up.
But you said the first was obligatory.
Look, Rabbi Lezer holds all 14 are obligatory. Right? You have to eat 14 sudas.
So if you miss any of them, you should have.
Yeah. Okay, and that's not how Rashi learns the kasha. Rashi learns the kasha. I said it wrong. I said it wrong. Rashi says that the chiyuv is to eat in the sukkah, the way you asked the kasha before. The chiyuv is to have 14 sudas in a sukkah. So what does it help to make up a meal on Shmini Atzeres when you're not eating in the sukkah? That's how Rashi asked the kasha. So let's just read it in Rashi. I've said it wrong. But Amar Rabbi Lazar Yudal Sudas Chayv on the Machal B'Sukkah. Mamish in the halfway market by Rashi's. The Kivan Dibiyoim Achron Loy B'Sukkah Yosef. Since on the last day of Yom Tov you're not sitting in the sukkah. V'im Yashav Ba L'Shem Mitzvah. And if you were to sit in it L'Shem Mitzvah, Oivra Bal Taisif. You're over a lav of Bal Taisif. So my hashlam the sukkah ikacha. So how are you making up the mitzvah of sukkah? You have to have 14 sudas in a sukkah. So it doesn't help to make it up on the last night on Shmini Atzeres. So Gemara says, huge. Amar Bira, that's the name of it, Amira. Amar Avami, Chazar by Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer retracted. It's amazing because it's a Mishnah. And it's the two halachas are said in the Mishnah, and when you read the Mishnah, it doesn't work. But for some reason, we kept it in the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer was Chazar by, he retracted from that halacha. So Gemara asks now, Mashlam b'mai. Okay, so that means, and he doesn't only have 14 meals. You only have to eat one meal in the sukkah. That's the first night, like the Chacham hold. But they do, but there is still machlekes whether you make that meal up if you missed it. Rabbi Lezer says you do, and and the Chacham say you don't.
Mashlim b'mai. You make it up on Shmini Atzeres.
Yes.
Or you can make it up the next night.
You make it up
if he doesn't hold the 15 anymore.
Right. Yeah, they talk about it. You can make it up on a night if you didn't have a chiv to eat.
I guess that's better.
Could be.
It's raining all 4 days.
Yeah, why you're not? I don't know. Tomorrow ask Masha B'mai. How should you make up this meal? So Ilema Berifta. If you're having bread, well, you're eating bread anyway, because you have a suda to eat on Shmini Atzeres. So if you're anyway having a suda, so it's not going to be nicker that you're doing a hashlam, you're doing anything extra. Elamai yashlam, yashlam mini targima. So he says, so have some mini targima. Rashi says, what's mini targima? Rashi says it's like fruit or some sweets, madanim, like delicacies, some nice, tasty stuff, extras, desserts, some extra stuff. Mini targima. That's what Rashi says. Tananami, we have a Bryce that says like that as well. And Hishlim, they might. B'mine tagima, yes. If you make up a meal with mine tagima, you would fulfill the obligation. Obviously, it's better to do if you have an additional suda with lechem and basar. That's even better. But if you use mine tagima, that would be good enough. Okay, Taisus disagrees. Taisus says Paris do not count for mine tagima. Taisus says it's the mine tagima are something like basar and dugim, things like that. And Taisus says, and don't think from this that if you can make up the suda for sukkahs with mina tegima, maybe you can do the same thing for shalosh shudis. Taisa says no. Taisa's sheet is that shalosh shudis needs to be with bread. All 3 meals, he says he makes there's a drasha that from the word hayayim, it says 3 times, and by Shabbos, therefore he holds that you would need to have pas for shalosh shudis. Taisa's shita. Others hold you can be yetzer minitagima that machlitz what considered minitagima if it's mezainis or if it's fruit. Okay. Shal, interesting Gemara. Shal apotropos shal agripas hamelach is Rabbi Eliezer. So the apotropos, so he's the guy in charge of the house, maybe the butler, maybe more important than that. About agripas hamelach, he asked Rabbi Eliezer, "Goinani, she'eni ragel echel el sudachas b'yam. I only eat 1 meal a day. Ma'u she'echel sudachas ve'eftim." Right? He's asking Rabbi Eliezer. Presumably, this is when Rabbi Eliezer held he had to have 14 meals. Taisus proves in this Gemara that Rabbi Eliezer was never chayzer in the fact that you need to have 14 meals. Taisus learns differently. Taisus learns that Rabbi Eliezer was chayzer that you have to have 14 meals in the sukkah, but he still has to hold 14 meals, and he brings it right from this Gemara. So again, the apotropos asked Rabbi Eliezer, "I only have 1 meal a day, so can I have 1 meal in the sukkah after I'm relate?" So Rabbi Eliezer answers him a little sharply. He says, a ganze Tag you're fressen, right? You're eating a whole day, delicacies. You only have 1 suda a day, but the rest of the day you're eating the, very fine food. You're nashing on very fine food. So and that you do for yourself. So you can't have 1 delicacy because you could be yetzer minitagima. You couldn't have 1 just to for God's sake. Okay. Another question is apotropos asked Rabbi Eliezer. I have 2 wives. Now this gets into a very fascinating sugya of whether you have to have. Do you need to be in the same sukkah for all of Yantif? Okay, can you be invited over as a guest? So he says like this: I have 2 wives. Achas b'Tveria, the achas b'Tzipori.
And he's in Yerushalayim? It works out.
And I have 2 sukkahs. I have 1 in Tveria and 1 in Tzipori. Says, I want to know, can I go from sukkah? Can I go sukkah hopping? I have the other. I'll say with 1, the other I'll go to the other. Does that work? Amrullah loy. You cannot do that. Shani Aimer, because I say kol yetzim sukkah sukkah. Batal mitzvasa sharishena. Anybody who leaves his original sukkah and goes to another sukkah, you messed up the sukkah. You messed up your mitzvah, because he holds that you need shetzarach Rashi last line shetzarach leishav kol shiva b'zat b'sukkah achas. You need to sit in the same sukkah all 7 days. Says the Gemara. Tanya, the Gemara's have a brayso now. Rabbi Eliezer says, "Ein yotzim sukkah sukkah." You can't go from one sukkah to another sukkah. To eat in one and to sleep in another. Or today in one and tomorrow in another. And you also can't make a sukkah during Chalamayit. But they both agree, if it fell down, you're allowed to rebuild it.
You can rebuild but not build it from start.
According to Rabbi Eliezer. What's tried in Rabbi Eliezer? My time to Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Kray says, look, let's read the pasuk. You should make yourself a sukkah 7 days. Asay sukkah haru'uya l'shiva. You need to have a sukkah that will suffice for 7 days, and therefore you can't make it during Chol Moed because then it wasn't right l'shiva. And you need to have a sukkah that you will be in for all those 7 days. You can't go from sukkah to sukkah because then the other sukkah was not for 7 days. V'Rabbanan. This is not how you read the pasuk. I say sukkah b'chag. You can make a sukkah on Yantif. Sukkah. The Shav and they both agree. That's pasha. Ma'ad would have thought maybe this is considered a different sukkah. And he wouldn't consider it for 7 days. Kamash Malan that it is considered the same sukkah. Taisa says that you need to make it from the same stuff. You had to rebuild the same sukkah. Rashi. I don't know. It doesn't say Mefurish. Rashi says, Yashabah Yamtiv, Yashabah. Yamtiv Zula Hashlami Sukkah Shiva Karina Bay. With Hashem Losheni, I don't know if you need the same one. I'm not sure. Okay. Those are different gears of this. Okay, fine. Right, Tanya, Rabbi Elazar. Kishem she'ein adam yotzi yidei chavas b'yom tov rishon shel chag. So it's that we had Rabbi Elazar's interesting. She does so far that you can't go from sukkah to sukkah, no sukkah hopping, and you can't go. You can't make a sukkah chol. You need ru'ilashim. Another halacha Rabbi Elazar says. Tanya Rabbi Elazar. Kishem she'ein adam yotzi yidei chavas b'yom tov rishon shel chag b'lulav shel chaveri. Just like we're going to learn at the beginning of the third paragraph that you can't use someone else's lulav on the first day of Yom Tov. It's got to be yours. You can't fulfill your mitzvah with somebody else's sukkah. You need to own your sukkah. You guys got to be yours. Like the pasuk says, Chag HaSukkos tasa lecha shivas yamim misha lecha. It has to be your sukkah, and therefore you would not be able to sit in somebody else's sukkah, sukkah she'ula, sukkah gazula. You couldn't borrow someone's sukkah. Even though we said we agree to that drasha. We agree that l'kachtam lachem is mimamayit was a lulav shaul and a lulav gazel. But you can use someone else's sukkah. Because the pasuk says, "Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshu b'sukkos." All the citizens in Israel will sit in sukkahs. Really, everybody can sit in the same sukkah. That's the drasha. That really, everybody should be able to sit in one sukkah. You should all be able to sit in a sukkah, so there's really a whole, even though the pasuk says lacha, but Kol Ezra tells you that everybody can be yotze in one sukkah. Well, what do you do with the sukkah that tasa lacha? They agree it can't be stolen; it just can be borrowed. But for shul, so Kol Ezra has come to teach you that it can be shul, it can be borrowed. So I can use someone else's sukkah. It doesn't have to be mine, but I'll be the lacha telling me it can't be stolen. Rabbi Eliezer, Kai Kol Ezrach Ma'avid. What do they do with Kol Ezrach? What happens if you have a ger that became a ger? So now he wants to build a sukkah, but it's not Ru'uy L'Shiva. Rabbi Eliezer says you need a sukkah that's Ru'uy L'Shiva, or a kaddish that's since gadol. A kid becomes bar mitzvah on Chol Hamoed. So now he wants to sit in the sukkah, but he couldn't fulfill his mitzvah of sukkah for all 7 days. So what about him? Kol Ezrach says no, that he's going to be obligated and he has a chiv of sukkah. He can build a sukkah, he can sit in the sukkah for the rest of the year. Rabbanon.
Not that you could use someone else's sukkah.
Correct. Rabbi Eliezer, I call Ezrach my avidlei. I'll talk about that in 1 second. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbanon keep it on rice and sukkah. Obviously, they don't need a pasuk to tell about a gershon's guy because they have no problem with building a sukkah on Chol Hamoed. It's only Rabbi Eliezer has a problem building a sukkah on Chol Hamoed. He's got a problem with a gershon's guy and a kaddish this gadol. Now, does this mean that every bar mitzvah boy's got to have his own sukkah on sukkahs according to Rabbi Eliezer? You have a family, every kid's got to, everybody's got to build their own sukkah because you can't be yetzu with a sukkah shel chaveri. That's what it sounds like. The Taisus is bothered by this. In Kol Ezrach, he says you're not yetzu with Shutvin, and at the end here, where does he talk about this? He mentions it somewhere. I thought he mentioned it. It wasn't him. Oh, there's somebody else. Oh no, there it is. The Tema. It's like 2, 4, 6, 8, about 10, 12 lines from the end of the Taisus of Kol Ezrach. Taisus is Vitema. The Rebbe Eliezer, the Bai Sukkah Shalachem, Ein Shem Yetze B'Sukkah Echad La'Olam Yitzarech L'Chol B'nei Abai Sukkah L'Chol Echad V'Echad. Everybody in the house is going to be their own sukkah. That's odd. Says Taisus Vishema, perhaps. Maybe there was a drush of Teishu Teduru. Just like in your house. You'll have all your B'nai Bai sitting in your house. From Teishu Teduru would tell you that you'd be allowed to eat, everybody in the family could sit together. Perhaps. All right, we'll see other stories here. Maybe there's some other Atayim according to the desert. Okay, let's go back to Tanraban. Maisa b'Rabbi Loi. We have a story of Rabbi Loi. Shaholach lahagbil pnei Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Belud b'regel. He went to visit his Rabbi Eliezer, who lived in Lud, Beregel and Yantif. Amr Eloi, Eloi. So he said, Eloi, what, you don't keep Yantif? What was his issue? Rashi says, Hoyel, it's in the middle of the page, Rashi, but you didn't say I'm with your wife. So he said, "What you don't keep Yom Tov?" We'll see. It's because the pasuk later on that says v'samachta. You keep Simchas Yom Tov as ato v'nacho v'ishtecha. You gotta be with the family on Yom Tov. Rabbi Eliezer says, "Mishabeach ani es hatzlanim." I praise the atzlanim. And don't leave their house on Yom Tov. Like the pasuk says, v'samachta ato beisecha. Correct the Gemara, is that so? Rabbi Yitzchak says, Rabbi Yitzchak says that how do you know there's an obligation to visit your Rebbe on Yom Tov? The pasuk says, she wanted, the husband wanted to know why you're going to the Navi. It's mashma that on Shabbos, Chodesh, Yom Tov somehow, also that you have a chiyuv to go, you're supposed to go visit your Rebbe. Like Hashem. Says that's not sure. The azul has to be it depends. If you can make it to your Rebbe and back at home for the Sudat night, that's fine. That's when you have an obligation to visit your Rebbe, according to Rabbi Eliezer. But if you can't make it back in time, then you can't go. You got to stay put. So that's the story of Rabbi Eliezer. Now, what happened to the? Okay. Okay. So let's get my advice. Turn about. Ma'aser Rabbi Eliezer. Now here we're talking about Rabbi Eliezer himself. Sheshavas beGalil ha'elyon. He went to the Galil ha'elyon. V'sukasai shel Yochanan b'Rabbi Loi b'Kesari. And he was in Yochanan b'Rabbi Loi sukkah in Kesaria. The Amri others say b'Kesiriyon. Okay. B'Higia chama l'sukkah. And it started getting hot in the sukkah. The sun started coming in. Amr Loi, so Yochanan, Rabbi Loi asked Rabbi Eliezer, Mahu she'efresh ala sadin. Can I put on a sheet over the sukkah now? Amr Loi, he diverted. He didn't answer the question, and he changed the topic. And he said to him, "You should know, Elocha kol shevet v'shevet in Israel. There wasn't a shevet amongst the Jewish people, shlehemed mimenu shevet, that didn't put up a shefet. Every from all of the sheftim that ruled Klal Yisrael from Yeshua all the way till Shaul HaMelech, there was a shefet from every shefet. Rashi goes through a bunch of them, and on the rest of them, at the end of Rashi, he says, "I don't know about the rest." He says, I don't know. He says he doesn't know either what shevet they were from, and there were some that he had no idea which shevet, who could have been the from that shevet. All right, that's the Rashi. Now, okay, that was Act 1. Scene 2, I should say. It started, the sun's now over half the sukkah. And again, Yochanan Bar Elai says, can I put a sheet over the sukkah? He said to him, and again, there weren't any shevet that didn't have Nevi'im that came out of them. And Shevet Yehuda Binyamin had Midim Malachim, and Shevet Yehuda and Binyamin even had kings, Alpi Nevi'im that were appointed through Nevi'im. The sun hit his feet, not al Yochanan Sadin appears, and then he went and he put the sheet over him. Rabbi Eliezer put his talis behind him, yes, and he left.
Where did he put the sheet?
Over the sukkah. To block the sun from coming in. Now Rashi says, we weren't here talking about, it wasn't necessarily sukkahs. And the Isser here was an issue of being Moisef al oil aray on Shabbos. Can you add to an oil on Shabbos? Okay, here an oil is something if there's a space on the top, you're going to spread. You're making an oil on Shabbos, so that it could be an issue. Here the issue is if you bring Moisef, it's already attached, and you're just spreading it across. Would that be permitted? That's the issue that they were dealing with. Now, the reason why Rabbi Eliezer wouldn't answer him is because he wouldn't say over Allah because I didn't hear from his Rebbe. Meaning I didn't hear this from his Rebbe, he wouldn't answer. Now, Eliezer. Let's look up. I'm sorry, we're going to discuss this now. So first of all, we have a few problems here. First of all, why was Rabbi Eliezer in a different sukkah? If Eliezer himself says that you can't go from sukkah to sukkah. So Mar says, Regal Acharabi. It wasn't actually sukkahs. It was some other holiday where they're sitting in a sukkah just for the fun of it. Another problem. The Reg was that, but it was Yantif, wasn't it? So if it was Yantif, then why was Rabbi Eliezer not not home? He says you're supposed to be home for Yantif. So where it says Shabbos Have, it was Shabbos. It wasn't Yantif at all. It was Stama Shabbos. Okay. Well, one more problem. Why can't we answer? Rabbi Eliezer said the halach about this. He spoke about this. The Tishul Mididei. Now we have a Mishnah that says Pekaka Chaloim. Excuse me. You have a hole, a window. Back in the day, it wasn't a window; it was just a hole in the wall. So you want to stop up the hole in the wall. That's called the pakak hachalei. Right? It was a stopper in the window. So Rabbi Eliezer, I remember, bismancha kosher vitoli. If it's tied to the wall and it's hanging there, then paikim, but you can use it. Right? Generally, you can't stuff things in your walls because that's being you're adding to your tzbaina. You're adding to your wall. But if it's already there and that's what its usage is, then that's okay. Either way you could do it. But here you see you could be myself on oil. You can add to a structure that if you have a contraption that's already set up, you can add. So then why wouldn't he answer the question? Where it says Hasim with Mavatal. Over there, it's bottled to the wall. This pakak is meant to service this window. That's what it's there for. So we look at it as part of the wall. Right? Even though it can go in and out. But over here, where this sheet is not part of the sukkah, it's not part of the structure, it's something that you wanted to get a sheet and add it on, so therefore you wouldn't be able to bring a riot from this Mishnah. Great.